we're going to start with Erika Winters, and then we're going to have Jay Schindler, and then Andrew Black. So let's go ahead and have Erika come on up.
Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be back here again, celebrating this amazing time in history with all of you. My name is Erika Winters. I'm the Community Outreach Director and Lead Garden Consultant for Oregon's Constant Gardener. And tonight we're going to get our hands dirty and talk about soil science, specifically for the consumer and how that affects you in your home garden. So what is soil made of? Typically when we're talking about outdoor soil, as our lucky winner in the back there so informed all of us, sand, silt, and clay are the mineral components of most native outdoor soil. Now, when we're talking about indoor gardening or pre-bagged potting soil, this is a very different mix of ingredients, and I'm glad we covered some of this in trivia tonight to launch this next segment. So indoors, we're mostly dealing with peat moss, bark or forest products, and cocoa fiber as the base of all of these soils. That takes the place of the sand, silt, clay ratios. From there, there's often a sand, perlite, or pumice addition, usually 10 to 30%, depending on the gardener's drainage goals. And those are to help with water shedding, specifically drainage. And most soils, especially our organic soils here locally, also have a compost component. And this is to mimic the organic materials that are found in nature. So some combination of these is what you'll generally find in your potting soil mixes. Now I want to talk about one of the most common and prevalent soil mixes and some pros and cons. So peat bogs around the earth. These are critical carbon sinks or places in which nature stores carbon dioxide. Now, they are such an important part of this carbon sequestration. They are just behind the oceans and actually store more than the forests around the world combined. They cover about 2 to 3% of our Earth's surfaces. And they're gorgeous environments, and they're very precious ecosystems. Now, to get the peat moss out, what they start to do is create channels, and they start to drain all the water out of these peat bogs. Now, these by nature are very acidic, and they're chock full of this peat and humic substance. This substance is used for many things around the world, primarily as a source of fuel, especially in Ireland. This is how they keep cozy in the cold winter months. Now, the harvest is extreme. Each one of these bricks here are pulled out of the earth, and then they're funneled around the planet for fuel and as a garden amendment. These channels go on for miles and miles and miles. So we're not just talking about peat bog destruction, we're talking about deforestation as well, to carve out the roadways in order to work in these spaces and to harvest the peat. Now, when they've milled it, it is a fine, fluffy substance that does make a really good base for soil mediums. And for the last 50 years, this is what most potting soil has been based from. Ironically enough, though, there's a lot of cons with this substance. Peat, as I said before, is inherently acidic. Now, most of us know that the proper soil pH for cannabis cultivation is going to be between 6 and 7. So this will lower pH in mixes, and it has to be buffered with lime. Additionally, it's actually hydrophobic, and what that means is it repels water away molecularly. Anybody who's ever worked with peat moss before, or those tiny little Jiffy peat plugs, may have experienced this firsthand. When it goes bone dry and you try to rehydrate it, it just pulls at the surface and rolls right down the side. So chemically, this is not the most ideal medium to work with. One of the most popular, especially around this area, is forest and bark-based products. These are also very acidic. This causes a lot of soil pH issues for gardeners. Now, if you pop off a quick flowering round in 2 months with a short 2-week veg time, you're probably going to be able to maintain that pH to the safe range. But after month 4, month 5, month 6, especially if you're keeping a mother plant going from year to year, you're going to run into some major pH issues down the road. And they rarely can be corrected without a liquid pH adjustment. In addition to that, bark is also hydrophobic. Again, remember, the bark is the exterior coating of a tree. It's meant to shed water, not absorb it. So again, not the most ideal for water retention. Now, I've been in garden retail for about 12 years now, and about 10 years ago, I saw cocoa fiber hit the market. Now, this was exciting. This is a renewable resource. It's the byproduct of coconut harvest, and they're using that exterior of the hull and those pithy fibers for a variety of resources, primarily garden soil. And it is hydrophilic, meaning that it is actually attracting water to it. It can hold 3 times its own weight in water. And it also breaks down into potassium and magnesium throughout the growth season, so there are some micronutrient benefits to cocoa fiber as well. Now, in addition to the base, either cocoa fiber, bark, or peat, you definitely need to get drainage, especially in the indoor garden world. And so there's generally a combination of sand, perlite, or pumice. Sand, as I stated earlier, is a very cheap way to achieve this. It does add a lot of weight to the potting soil mix as well. And there is the potential for heavy metal contamination and potential unknowns. So that's something to be aware of. Perlite is a wonderful way to achieve drainage in your soil. And again, this is usually at about 10 to 30% of the overall medium. Unfortunately, perlite is very, very costly and very harmful to our environment to produce. It takes a lot of water, a lot of electricity, and a lot of fossil fuels to expand that rock and create it into something that will drain adequately in your soil medium. So pumice is something that I'm a big fan of. It's naturally porous. It just needs to be milled down to a finer grade. It does not float like perlite does. Oftentimes you'll see about 10% of your perlite rise to the top of your soil container. That pumice sits where it's meant to stay, and it does a wonderful job of both providing drainage and for a surface area for microbes to build their colonies on. So I'm a big fan of pumice. Now here in Lane County, we are in a very unique situation. We have over 5 local soil manufacturers. There's not another town in the nation that can say that. We've got Lane and Rexius making municipally based composted products. The base of most of their soils is bark or byproducts of the forest industry. So again, pH issues. Bark can also rob essential nutrients from the plant. They've always been nicknamed as nitrogen robbers in my book. So you have to be a little bit wary of that as well. But 2 big companies right here in town, they will deliver, and they have huge quantities available. In addition to that, we have 3 local organic soil manufacturers, Roots Organics through Aqua Serene, Down to Earth, and Nectar for the Gods by Oregon's Only. Now, what this means to you as the consumer is this is a buyer's market, my friends. So bags of our soil on the East Coast easily retail for $20 to $25. Bags of Down to Earth Pro Mix in California easily sell for over $40. It is incredible what our local market has done to drive the price down, and this isn't due to the competition, which is really of benefit to our customer base because you guys have options and you're able to achieve quality organic soils at a really low cost. So we're very fortunate in this community. I do encourage you to speak directly with the folks at your local garden stores. Ask them to rip open a bag, get your hands dirty, and find out what is in there. It makes a huge difference when you know exactly what those local inputs are. Oregon's Only organic soil was started by 2 guys who were grossed out by the nasty chemicals and imported byproducts that were put in their soils and fertilizers. We created a soil blend 8 years ago for us, garden soil that we wanted to use at home. Most of us at Oregon's Constant Gardener have come from a garden retail background, and we spend our days on the floor diagnosing problems and looking at unhappy gardens. And so much of this begins in the soil. As is below, so shall be above. And this is a really important point to take note of. We start with a cocoa fiber base. We do add a very small percentage of peat, and that's going to be true for every cocoa fiber mix on the market. Peat is one of the richest sources of humic acid out there. And humic acid is so important for healthy soil. Humic substances specifically are beneficial for increasing nutrient uptake. The way it was described to me was it turns straw-like roots into sponges, and it teases open tiny pores or stomata along the root edge so it can force feed more fertilizer for quicker, more accelerated growth. That cocoa fiber is complemented by a 50-50 pumice and perlite blend. We've chosen to use both, again, for that really important water drainage feature, and also to start to diminish our dependence on perlite as a garden amendment and really, really depend on that pumice. It's more sustainable, and it works better in the indoor garden environment overall. From there, we add a healthy smattering of microbes, mycorrhizae fungi, and as well as beneficial bacteria complex from the worm castings. We add a couple of pest control preventatives, which is very unique to our soils. We put a Bt bacteria, Bacillus thuringiensis, that is very, very renowned for feeding on soil-borne larvae and soft-bodied pests. We also sprinkle in diatomaceous earth. Diatoms harvested from ancient seafloor beds on a molecular level appear to be tiny ninja stars. Now, when they're dry, any pest that crosses over them literally gets sliced and diced to death. So it's a very, very effective way to build in pest control into an organic soil. Diatomaceous earth is also chock full of silicates, which are really helpful at beefing up cell structure for plants and improving overall vigor and health and resistance to things like pest and disease attack. From there, we add in a very generous helping of organic fertilizers, from cow bone to fish bone, feather meal, kelp, glacial rock dust, paramagnetic sand, and we also use limestone from Southern Oregon caves to help buffer out the pH of our cocoa fiber blends. So I really encourage all of you as soil consumers to go beyond the label and ask questions of your local garden specialists. There are so many different possibilities out there, and it is so critical that you start with that healthy soil life, because as I've said before, as is below, so shall be above. And together we can get beyond the label, and we can get organic, and we can grow the healthiest medicine that we've ever seen in this county before. So thank you for joining me tonight. I really appreciate your time, and thank you. I'd like to open it up to any questions.
Years ago, growers were using TMI, trace mineral ingredients, and I think now they're using something called, it's not zeolite, but it's something like that. You know what what's it called? Azomite. Yeah, I'd like to know what the difference is between those two products. And then I had one more question.
Sure, yeah, there's, so the question was what mineral complexes are available on the market? Zeolite, azomite, accelerite. These are all different rock dusts from different sources around our Earth. Some of them are glacial, some of them are volcanic, and others are derived from ancient oceans, basalt.
Okay. The other thing is, some years ago, I believe it was Lane Forest Product, delivered a bunch of soil to a place in Cheshire, and they thought they saw some marijuana plants, so they turned them into the police. And the helicopters came down, and the attack dogs and the assault rifles, and they had the wife upside down in her nightgown in the front porch. It turns out, I went to the trial, that it turns out on the other side of the property there was some marijuana plants in the greenhouse, but it was tomato plants on that side of the property, and yet they still busted them, and they had to pay like $10,000 or $15,000 in legal fees. So I'm inclined not to support Lane Forest Products as much. Maybe they've changed their ways, but I just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Yeah, it's very important, no doubt. Does anybody else have any questions about soil structure or texture, local ingredients and inputs available? Right there.
Yeah, I heard you mention you had paramagnetic sand in there. What are the benefits of that?
Paramagnetic sand is a really interesting one. Thank you for asking. So paramagnetic rock is inherently magnetic, and it polarizes ions in the soil to maximize things like water transport, nutrient transport, and they do a wonderful job of accelerating the growth of the plant. And they also persist in the soil for thousands of years, so you only have to apply it once outdoors. And if you are working with indoor container gardens, you definitely want to repurpose that soil either in your outdoor garden or looking into some no-till repurposing practices inside. Thank you. Any other questions?
One thing I didn't really get was all the minerals. Can you go over the minerals that you put into your soil?
Absolutely. So most of it comes from glacial rock dust. Accelerite was the name of the company that we used for years. And this was a very interesting cache of micronutrients. So there was a meteorite that collided with our planet and kicked up a huge pocket of these trace minerals. And when they ran the analysis, it was very close to azomite, but much lower in sodium than some of the basalt rock sources that we've come across. So Accelerite would be the company name to research. Absolutely. Up front?
Are there efforts underway to use chromatography to identify the composition of different soils from different geographical regions and how that might interplay into the health of plants that grow with them? Of course, I know plants might have different uptake characteristics depending on their biochemistry, but I read an article a few years ago about how the Mars laser technology was now applicable to, for example, detect fraud in honey and olive oil based on a profile of many different trace minerals and the chromatography. And I'm just wondering, is there data available on this? Is this something anyone's doing?
I know what I'm Googling tonight. I don't know, to be honest. That's a wonderful question. And there's a wealth of information out there. I haven't personally tapped into that, though. I appreciate that. I'll be looking into that. Thank you. Back here? Yes?
People use seeds a lot in the past. They were recommended to bake the soil, whether you put different kinds of outdoor soil or compost, to a certain degree, not to raise it above that. Is that still recommended today for seed starting?
So the question is it advisable to cook or pasteurize soil prior to planting seeds? If you have a good local organic potting soil mix, I would say that is not necessary. If you're starting with an inert substance, Sunshine 4, for instance, makes a peat and perlite blend with no microbes. You would have the potential for a pathogen to anchor down and potentially harm that round of plants. My belief is if you let nature find her own systems of checks and balances, and we do our best to recreate what was natural once outdoors in our indoor potting soil environment, that's not necessary.
And is vermiculite the same as pumice? Because when you use those dry perlite or vermiculite, you're supposed to put water on them and use a mask because people have had lung issues from kicking those around in the greenhouse dry.
Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, just because it's organic doesn't mean it's safe. And perlite does have silicon dioxide and a number of lung irritants that tend to cloud up when you're working with it. So with any organic amendment, substrate, fertilizer, or manure, I think it's a really good idea to protect yourself. It may not be pathogenic to our bodies, but it'll definitely irritate our respiratory system. Thank you for that tip.
And one other thing, sand in California, I think they have it on the bags that it's potentially carcinogenic. I'm not sure why. And the last question is, it used to be that people were advised to pasteurize their indoor soil or to use new soil every time, which seems quite expensive of resources. Is there a way to use, I don't use chlorine myself, and I'm not even a grower, but grapefruit seed extract or something like hydrogen peroxide for a natural means?
Great, so I got two questions there. First, in California, labeling is a nightmare for agricultural products. Everything causes cancer in the state of California. So you have to take all of those warnings with a grain of salt. The second question being, can you use grapefruit seed extract or other natural sterilizers to help clean medias and seeds? I believe that you can, but remember that they kill life indiscriminately and that you will need to re-inoculate after sterilizing. Right up front.
Being an organic gardener in all aspects, I compost a lot, and yet everything. Do you think I need this? Most people don't think I need a mic, but that's okay. Anyway, TLO, I think it's True Living Organics, talks about reusing soil over and over and over again. I tend to find, especially in Oregon, there's a lot of molds and fungi, and not necessarily beneficial. I tend to want to sterilize, and I know it decreases some of the good stuff, but it also decreases some of the bad stuff in my compost to make soil. Any advice on that?
Absolutely. I would say up until 2 years ago, I would never have advised anyone to reuse their indoor potting soil indoors again. Bring it out to the landscape, bring it out to the flower beds, plant your veggies in it. The issue is we have a huge occurrence of molds and mildews in our valley, from botrytis to powdery mildew. Some of these are soil-borne, others are airborne. My advice is if you had a problem that round in that container of soil, send it back out to Mother Nature to remediate it. If you didn't have a problem and you're an advanced gardener and you're experimenting with TLO, Total Living Organics, or no-till gardening where you're actually doing cover cropping in between rounds, I would encourage people to play with it. The biggest concern that I saw a couple years ago was a particularly pernicious pest that is soil dwelling, the root aphid. And they are so devastating. People didn't know that they had an issue until they were so far gone into it that treatment wasn't even an option. And they're very, very small, so it can be very difficult to detect even with the trained eye. So if there's any risk of bugs or molds, I would not reuse the soil indoors. I would send it out to Mother Nature to remediate. But I think for the advanced gardener, there's so much promise and potential yet to be found. You're welcome. All right. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. I really appreciate it.